Hello and welcome to Sound Like, and in today's video we're going to be taking another look at Plug-in Baby. I wanted to take another look at this song and do another sound like for it because, well, the original looks like this, and I now have a guitar that can do this. That video was from the very early days of the channel, hence the low production value, and since then my sound has kind of very much evolved, and to me that sound is really out of date and not really equal to kind of what I'm playing with now. And I wanted to give you a much more up-to-date and more accurate way of sounding like Plug-in Baby. So as always, I'm going to be showing you exactly what pedals I'm using and the rough sort of sounds you should be going for. I'll also be showing you the amp simulation I'm using, so everything is exactly the same, it's just a much more updated version of what I'm playing with. So let's get started. So we're going to start at the beginning of the song, and the main focus of this section of the song is of course the Fuzz Factory. While the Fuzz Factory is what is used in the studio and live, I would not say it's an absolutely critical component to get an accurate sound for this song. I would argue that the most important thing to focus on here is just getting a fuzz sound, so any decent fuzz pedal will work just as well. Now before we get into that, I'm going to describe the full signal chain, or the options that you have available to you. Now in the live version at the very least, there is some modulation going on in there, which is provided by the Phase 90 pedal. You have the option of having this before or after your fuzz pedal. It is entirely up to you how you do it. Now the way I believe that Matt has this is by having the phase in front of the fuzz. Well, that's how I believe his guitar is wired. So if you want to have a more live, accurate version of this song, I may suggest that, but there's nothing wrong with you having the phase behind the fuzz. Now in a normal pedal board, you want to have your modulation effects before your time effects and after your drive. You will want to modulate your drive sound. It's entirely up to you how you really want to do it, but this is how the convention really is. The way that I have my sound now that I've got my New Era Manson is by having the Fuzz Factory going into the phase sound, which obviously is not live accurate, but I do like that sound. And the novelty of having a Fuzz Factory built into a guitar is quite fun as well. It's a super minor detail that I'm never really going to get too fussy about. My main concern for this part of the song is just to have a self-oscillating pedal that can do those weird sounds. Now to dive into what my signal chain actually is, it is of course my New Era Manson going into my Boss ES8, where it then hits the Phase 90, but then goes into my Boss OS2. In terms of the settings for the Boss OS2, I've got the control all the way over on the overdrive sound. This will give a much more boxy mid-focus type sound, and I feel that would complement the fuzz sound from the guitar really quite well. There is of course the argument of just really having the Fuzz Factory as the main drive, but after I got my New Era Manson, I was of course experimenting with it, and this was kind of one of the first songs that I wanted to look at when considering what the Fuzz Factory could do. And what I found was that I like to put the Fuzz Factory into another drive to really essentially just round off what that sound is and kind of give it a little bit more kind of stability. It is entirely up to you if you'd want to follow that, especially if you have, say, a guitar with a Fuzz Factory built in, or if you have a Fuzz Factory at all. Before this, obviously, I was just running the Fuzz Factory and didn't really consider about coloring the sound of that Fuzz Factory. It is entirely up to you if you want to go down that route, but it is something that I would suggest to at least try to see what you can get out of it. Now after my pedal board, it goes into my amp simulation rig, which you can see here. What the setup I'm going for here is to focus on more of a mid-focus sound with something that's kind of quite low-end and beefy as well, hence that I'm using 4 amps here. Obviously the advantage that I've got is that I can simulate my amp, and most people I would imagine have basically just one real-life physical amp in front of them. My suggestion for your amp settings at this point would be to have something that's really focused around the mids, maybe with a little bit more kick around the low end. Fuzz pedals really kind of operate around that mid frequency area, and you really want to really focus in on that in yourself and get a really good saturated type of sound. Obviously for pedals, what I'm using here as the main focus for the drive is a Fuzz Factory, which is what Matt used in the studio and continues to use live for playing Plug-in Baby. If you don't have a Fuzz Factory, it's not a major critical point. Yes, it is quite fun to have a self-oscillating pedal. However, just getting a good fuzz focus type sound is what I would say is the critical point if you want to focus on getting an authentic sound. The main focus is to get a really good overly saturated fuzzy tone. If you don't have a fuzz pedal, then just use an overdrive, I guess, but if you really want to get a sound that's at least ballpark accurate, get a fuzz pedal. That's all I would really suggest as the bare minimum. As I mentioned previously, my Boss OS2 is following my fuzz sound, so why not remove it and see what just the Fuzz Factory is doing to the overall sound. As well as this, I'd like to demonstrate what the sound is from a normal pedal board setup. So I'm going to not use the Fuzz Factory built in the guitar and use the pedal version I've got in my board, and also have the phase in front of the fuzz so it's much more in line with the live sound. And I would imagine much more conventional to how a lot of people would be using this if they do have a Fuzz Factory themselves. And as before, this is just the modulation and the Fuzz Factory is the only sort of drive. So what does it sound like? It is entirely up to you of which of these sounds that you prefer. The one that I go for is obviously the pedal built into the guitar, into my phase, and then being distorted as well. That's kind of a sound that I have grown to kind of really enjoy, and having a pedal to kind of colour the overall sound of the kind of Fuzz Factory as well is something that I really quite like, and I've never really kind of approached a guitar tone like this before. And still having the novelty of a fuzz pedal built into a guitar is quite fun. The first sound now that we're going to be looking at is very different from the one that I used previously. In terms of pedals I'm using, it is my whammy, my Timmy overdrive, my phase 90 and some delay. The way that I'm using these pedals is really quite interesting. So on the one side it is just the phase 90 and then going on to the amp section. The other side is the Timmy overdrive, into the whammy, into the delay and then into the amp sound. The settings for these pedals are that the Timmy overdrive is not focusing on getting a gainy type sound. It's there mainly just to get a bit more level out of the sound so that it is equal to the level from the phase 90 side of the chain. Then goes into the whammy, set to 2 octaves up. Then finally into the delay, which as the BPM taps into the song, the level of the delay all the way up to as high as it will go, and then the feedback at around 12 o'clock. What this does is have the repeats of the sound equal to or even louder than the original sound, so it's really overly saturated. Then that high level of feedback from the delay helps to really overly saturate that sound as well to give some really long trails. The phase 90, as with previously, is set to its slowest possible setting, though I would say it's a bit open to interpretation how you want to do it, so go crazy. My only suggestion is to not go too fast. This sound is through my own personal preference, where I can achieve it through something like the Boss ES8, where I can split my signal and affect each side or each channel accordingly. If you don't have anything like that, and if you're running through a straight line mono board, my main focus for you to have at this point would be delay, of course. Keep the phase or the modulation going on in there, and have a little bit of gain to kind of get some level through there. The whammy that I'm using is to kind of really emulate a more synthy type sound, a little bit more like how it is done live, but there is a synth sound that is kind of going on in the record version, the studio version. It's just kind of like a happy medium between the two. I believe it is a whammy that is still being used live, so it's quite accurate in terms of how that sound is there. In the studio version, I believe Matt was using like kind of a MIDI pickup in the guitar to trigger a sound from like a Roland synth kind of generator type sound. The sound from the studio version is quite ethereal and quite airy, so anything that's going to kind of emulate something even remotely like that, I would say passes for that. If you want to focus on the live type sound, as you may have done by having the phase in front of the fuzz, having the whammy in these settings is going to be quite useful as well. If you have a mono board and you still want to get something that's going to be quite a good balance between a guitar sound and that synthy sound, you may want to consider switching the whammy over to the harmony octave up setting, so you still got that dry sound but also that harmony octave up. The difference here is that the whammy is going to be set to only 1 octave up and not 2 like I've got mine here. As always with these types of textures, I do say it's very open to interpretation, and Matt is giving you essentially this opportunity to kind of create your own sound. I believe the sound that I've got is much more in line to what that live sound is, but there's still kind of wiggle room for my own version of it if I ever wanted to go crazy with it. Moving on now to the pre-chorus and the chorus. What I'm using here is exactly the same pedals, the OS2 and my Phase 90. For my own particular sound for this part of the song, I've got the trails from the delay bleeding into the sound. This marks a kind of a good transition between the verse and the pre-chorus and then into the chorus. It's a super minor detail. I wouldn't say it's exactly kind of critical to it. It's just because I have the ability to do it because of the Boss ES8, and the DD8 would on its own, if you turn it off, would still have the trails kind of fading out anyway. I do like that sound that you get from kind of the delay kind of fading out whilst bringing in a new particular sound. Going back to what the delay settings are, the level is turned all the way up, so the repeats are as loud as they could possibly be, and those trails are quite long because the feedback is at around 12 o'clock. Those long trails, which help to kind of build that kind of ambience in the verse, help further by having that long kind of fading transition into the chorus. If you don't have a delay pedal that still has the trails going on when you turn it off, it's not the kind of the main focus here. My main focus for you to have is a good strong overdrive type sound mixed in with that modulation type sound, which by the way is going on for the entirety of the song. I may be using the Boss OS2. That is definitely not what Matt used in the studio, and it's certainly not what he uses live. The sound that I can really hear is a kind of a mid-focus type sound, and an overdrive kind of fits that bill quite well. You could, if you have something like the capabilities of the Boss ES8, is split the channel, have the OS2 on one side and a fuzz sound on the other. What that will do will kind of saturate that sound even further and kind of get much more of a mid-focus fuzzy kind of sound mixed in there. It's entirely up to you if you want to do that. I used to have that approach with this, but since kind of having the Manson with the Fuzz Factory built in and kind of playing around with my sound and wanting to evolve it and having a much more streamlined sound for some parts of songs, I do like to focus on the OS2, fully focused on the overdrive sound as my main drive sound. It's entirely up to you if you want to kind of play around with it, but I think that having a strong overdrive sound really fits what the chorus is kind of really asking of you. And with that in mind, this is what it sounds like. So with that is my updated version on how to sound like Plug-in Baby. We've sort of blitzed through it. I didn't really focus on any of the kind of live improvisational versions of the song, just a kind of stripped down studio version of what's being played, but with kind of like the live sort of sound kind of in mind. Both work for the studio and the live version, but I would argue that the live version is a bit more interesting. As always with these sound like videos, these are just my suggestions. It's entirely up to you if you want to take them on board, and if you thought they were any good, let me know what you thought about them down in the comments below. I've recently kind of watched some of my previous sound like videos, hence why I'm redoing this one, as I kind of watched back on some of them and thought they were a bit, shall we say, ungood in terms of production value, and certainly because my sound has evolved since making them. I've been doing these since about 2020. I wanted to redo Plug-in Baby because it's one of my most early ones. The sound has significantly changed, and it's still a relevant song that a lot of Muse fans want, and I wanted to give my version of an updated sound for it just to see if people like it. So let me know what you'd like me to do in future down in the comments below. I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.